Hi, I'm Allie Hamilton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Come As You Are podcast. Every week, we'll be talking about some aspect of healing, usually around childhood wounds and complicated familial relationships. The topics will always coincide with my personal essay of the week, and this will be a place where we can take a deep dive together. I'm so thrilled you've joined me and delighted for you to always come as you are. Hi there. Hi there. Welcome. This week, our topic is in the face of loss, what we hold on to and what we release is everything. And it felt like a good week to talk about loss and talk about grief. And I've certainly experienced a lot of that in the last few years. I lost my mom at the end of 2021, and my dad died in July, just this past July. And my half-sister passed away kind of right smack in the middle of that. So that's been really the undercurrent for me for the last few years. And I think for many of us, I mean, I think even if you didn't actually lose people in the last few years, we all went through a lot of mourning and grief during the pandemic, just the loss of everything we knew as, our normal lives came to a screeching halt. Our ability to reach out, connect with each other in person, was pretty much instantly taken away. Very heightened emotions. It was just a really intense time for the world. And so I think no matter what has been happening in your personal life, you've been touched by loss, grief, mourning, just all the feelings that come along with that. And I do think a lot of people use that time as an opportunity to really take stock and to assess, where they were in their lives and how life was feeling. And I know for me, one of the things in the midst of all of the other things that were happening, I had two teenagers at home, Zoom schooling. My son began his first year of high school from his bedroom, and my daughter was in her final year. No, she was in her first year of middle school. That's right. So both of them began those years from their bedrooms, and it was just a lot for, as we all know, if you're working and trying to manage all of that. And then in the middle of that, really, my mom became quite ill, and at first we didn't know what was happening. If you've been following along, I had a really tough time with my mom, and I'm writing about this in my memoir, and I'm not going to talk about it in too much detail right now, but writing a whole kind of memoir about my relationship with her. And it's really a love letter in a lot of ways to my mother, but it's also really painful. It was never an easy relationship because of her alcoholism and her refusal to acknowledge it, admit it, deal with it, get help. Those were things that were never on the table. And so I grew up in an environment where the requirement was to deny reality. It's like I'm looking at this situation, especially as I was getting older and feeling like something was really not right. And all the adults in my life were telling me my mother was fine and I was dramatic and sensitive and, nothing was wrong. And so that's the environment that I grew up in. And then I had my dad, and I was writing about this in the personal essay this week. And, I have a very difficult relationship with my dad as well. And my dad was 19 years older than my mom. relationship. My dad was married when they met, and he had two kids who were 14 and 16. And I think they were probably like 13 and 15 when my parents met, and they had an affair. And my dad ended up leaving his family. My mom was 3 years older than his daughter. So his first wife was understandably, devastated, angry, as you would be. And he moved from Buffalo to New York City, and he and my mom eventually got married. And 4 years later, they had me. And he, I never knew of him to like his kids ended up moving with their mom to Georgia. That's where her family was from. And I have no recollection of my dad ever visiting, or I met um, my half brother, so my dad's son from his first marriage, came and lived with my mom and dad and me when I was 3 for a summer. And that's really the only time I spent any time with him at all. And then my half sister, my dad's daughter from his first marriage, I met twice. Once when I was about 6, and she came to New York City, and I remember just being so. I just thought she was the most. I couldn't believe she was so beautiful, like the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen in my entire life. Blonde, blue-eyed, just this Georgian, like I just couldn't even believe it. And then I met her again. We went to Georgia when I was 11 and spent a week with her, and that was it. That's all the interaction that I had with her. And my dad was just not very, he left his family. He was not very involved in their lives after that. And it was very painful, I think, for them, of course. And so that's kind of just a little bit of the background there. And the reason that I wanted to talk about this week is obviously there's no way to have a conversation right now and not acknowledge what's happening in the world, which is so devastating and heartbreaking and painful. It's just I have been, and I'm sure you have as well, doing anything is hard right now. Just like getting up and doing the things that need to get done as all of these horrific things are happening. It's really tough. I didn't feel like writing this week. All I can think about is the absolute, just suffering of so many people. And in addition to that, the environment that we're all in, where, you can't even express your heartache and your, just immense sadness for humanity. Like you can't even say that. And it's just it's such a heated, painful environment. And emotions are running so high, understandably, but I just, it's been really disheartening to see the lack of ability to have any kind of nuanced conversation about really anything is exhausting, right? It's like it's really hard to be a human being while all those things are happening. And so I can't have any kind of conversation today without acknowledging that that's the context. And so when I thought about like what I was going to write, it made sense for me to write about immense loss and grief, but also the opportunity in our own personal worlds, right, to really think about nuance and to think about the gray area with people. I honestly believe that the microcosm and the macrocosm are, wildly interrelated. Meaning, if you start to look at just your own history and your own life and your own relationships and whatever experiences, whatever emotions, in your history, the things that have happened, the people who've let you down, the times you've felt intense rage, it's like we're just seeing that on the world stage. We're just human beings. Ultimately, when you come down to any conflict anywhere at any time, you're dealing with human beings, and human beings having, really painful, intense feelings. That's at the heart of any conflict. And usually underneath all of that is pain, right? Is just people feeling unheard, unseen, undervalued or devalued, or, just discarded, disrespected, misunderstood. That's usually what's happening. If somebody is really beside themselves or overtaken by rage or despair, it's because they're hopeless. They just feel so alone in their experience. That's usually what is happening on some level, on the cellular level of pretty much anything that we're seeing anywhere. And so it made sense for me to talk about my own personal world for a little while and some of the things that happened along the way. And certainly, you could go back and look at some of the other essays if you are so inclined. And if you haven't read them, my dad, I wrote a lot about in Reconciliation and in Groomed. And my mom, I wrote a lot about in Exposed, and Everyone Leaves. So, I think I've done a deep dive into my experiences with my parents, and I'm not going to rehash that right now. But I had a lot of rage coming out of my childhood. And I think my rage erupted first toward my dad when I was 13 because I couldn't take it anymore. He had really turned me into his tiny therapist from the time I was 4, from the time my parents split until I was 13. And his sort of, I keep using the term wing child, even though that's not a thing, instead of wingman. He'd just take me on dates with him and park me in front of the TV while he was, having relations with some woman in her bedroom. And then we'd go home to my stepmom and have dinner, and he'd say we'd gone to the playground. That was a really typical thing that was happening multiple times a week when I was at my dad's. And, just growing up in that environment of lying and, I learned to be quiet. He did the lying, but I was, I didn't say anything because he told me these women were friends and he was rehearsing, and it was, nothing for my stepmom to be upset about. And so he told me that she was sensitive and, she was sort of, he labeled her with the same adjectives that I was being labeled with at my mom's for being worried about her. It's just, oh, she's sensitive, she's overly dramatic, she's, she won't believe that this is just a friend. And, of course, she knew it wasn't just a friend, but I was a kid. So I came out of that, and I was, by the time I got to be 13, I didn't want to be involved in his personal life in any way anymore. I didn't want to hear about, I used to cry in my arms and tell me he needed to be free, he couldn't commit, and, and I would feel really sorry for him and think he was the victim of all these awful women who wouldn't share. That was the sort of narrative that I believed as a kid. And when I got to be 13, I think, I was putting things together yeah, you don't really seem like the victim in this situation. I think you may be the perpetrator of a lot of heartbreak for a lot of people. And me too, I had there was no chance for me to have just innocence, right? Just a normal, carefree, lighthearted childhood. He took that from me because I was constantly worried about him. Even when I was at my mom's, I was worried that he wasn't going to be okay without me, because that's the impression that he gave me, that I was like keeping it all together for him, and he didn't know what he would do without me, and he loved me more than anything in the world. And, it was a lot of pressure. His love was smothering and scary and, painful. And it taught me that my job in the world was to make things better, to listen, to be there, to be supportive, to be helpful in any way I could. And at my mom's, I was having a different, the reasons were very different, but I was getting the same message, which is my job is to do anything and everything I can to make my mom happy, to please her, to try to earn her love and her approval, maybe occasionally her affection. And so when I got to be 13, I did not want to go to my dad's anymore, and woke up and said that one day, and that led to a whole course of events that were difficult. And then with my mom, I think the rage toward her came out when I was 16, because I started to realize, no, she absolutely is an alcoholic. It's not me. It's not that there's a problem with my perception and that she's actually fine. She's an alcoholic, and she's surrounded by other alcoholics and enablers. Now, I want to be really clear, alcoholism, if people who are suffering with addiction are in pain. So I'm not throwing that word around with in any sort of derogatory. It's a painful experience to feel like you are so not okay. You have to numb yourself in order to survive, in order to get through the hour or the day. To be in that much pain that you're bring on whatever the numbing agent is. I need it because I cannot tolerate this feeling that I'm having. That's heartbreaking. And that's the part of this, for my mom, it breaks my heart that she would not look at these things and try to figure out what is causing this need in me to start drinking at 5 o'clock every day. What is so uncomfortable about what I'm feeling that I just want to make that feeling go away. And that's really at the heart of all addiction, is I cannot tolerate this feeling that I'm having. It's so uncomfortable to be in my own body, to be inside my own skin, to be inside my own mind right now, to have these feelings in my heart. I cannot tolerate it. So I need to take something to make it stop. It's a terribly painful place to be. So I have all the compassion in the world for people who are struggling in that way. And I had all that compassion for my mother. I wanted to figure out what's happening for you and why are you so deeply unhappy, but she would insist, I'm a happy person. You're sensitive. I don't have a drinking problem, she would not have those conversations. And yet when she drank, especially as I was little, and growing, and really until I got to be 16. When I was 16, we were finally at the same height. And it's a very interesting thing when you are the child of an alcoholic and you're tiny, and that person drinks and, is physically threatening, which, sadly she was. I learned to, back myself into the corner and kind of have my arms up over my head to try to protect myself. I spent my childhood with my in that protective position. When I started doing yoga, everywhere I went, the teachers said, "Wow, your shoulders are so tight. You have so much tension across your chest and in your shoulders and your upper back." And by the way, that's not helpful to say that to someone. It made me feel really self-conscious. Much better to be saying things "Oh wow, look at all this. You have a lot of room to open here. Let's really get in there and get start playing with your shoulders and seeing." There's a way to frame that so the person isn't feeling my shoulders are really tight. What's going on with me? So that, just a little aside there. But, I came out of my childhood and entered the world with an intense amount of rage toward my parents and sadness, heartache, heartbreak, like real despair. I really felt so the older I got, really, the harder it was to understand my dad because he was 45 when I was born. He was not, 25. My mom was 24. And so the older I got, the more compassion I had for my mom, and kind of like the harder it was for me to feel compassion for my dad, because it was kind of like, dude, you got to know at 45 years old, you should not be burdening your 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12-year old child with your very adult problems. Like, you had to have known on some level, I shouldn't be doing this. Like, I shouldn't be talking to her and crying in her arms and sobbing. And, it was scary for me. I knew that I was not, I didn't have I couldn't make it okay for him. I knew that. And it's scary when you see your dad, right? Like crying in your arms. You're thinking like, wait a minute, am I in control here? Like, am I supposed to know how to make things better? Like, I don't know how to do this. It's terrifying. And it makes you feel deeply insecure in the world because you're like, well, this person is certainly not running the show. I mean, if he's the guy I have to depend on to make good decisions for me or any decisions for me or to keep me safe, like I'm screwed. So I knew that I couldn't lean on him. My mother was she ran the house, and she was very controlling. And I think for her, her desire to control things was a desire to prevent loss, to prevent, pain and hurt. And this is a person, her dad died when she was 13. And her mom, died when she was just when I was 4. So she was 28. And it was a lot of loss for her to deal with. And she didn't have, she was never the kind of person to get help or to, try to find like grief support or go to therapy. Like that just was not, she just was not that person. And so I think that the trauma from her own childhood really had an impact, as it does on all of us, on the way she was moving through the world. And I think in my mother's mind, though I highly doubt it was conscious, if she could keep everything looking right, if the couch pillows were fluffed and everything was spotless and she was spotless and put together and and I was and my brother was and my stepdad, then everything was sort of okay. And so she ran the house with an iron fist. And but at night it would just, her whole personality would change. Not every time she drank, but most of the time. And that's when you're dealing with disorganized attachment, right? You don't know what is going to happen. Maybe some days everything's okay and other days it's not okay at all. And so I felt deeply, I believed if you had met me when I was 16, I would have told you my mother does not love me. And my dad is a mess, and he doesn't talk to me anymore. Like what happened when I did decide I don't want to go over there to my dad's anymore is he like almost instantly found a therapist, which was that's a good move. And she instantly said to him, stop talking to your daughter, like today. Do not talk to her about your problems. Talk to her about like school, her life, like anything, but do not talk to her about the women in your life, your troubles. Like just stop that instantly. You should never have been doing that. Well, he did not know how to talk to me at all. If those subjects were off the table, he had nothing to say. And he behaved like the victim in the situation. There was a lot of, manipulation, kind of like, poor me, you've rejected me, you've betrayed me by telling, by like saying to this therapist that I've been talking to you. He acted like the injured party. And that was enraging. And then my stepmom was in the dark because she did not know that he was confiding all these things in me. And I couldn't go to her and say, the reason I didn't want to come over anymore is because dad's been talking to me about all this stuff, because she wasn't supposed to know any of that. And I didn't want her to be devastated, to find out that all these years where she's thinking he's, cheating on her, she's correct. And she knew, but, I didn't need to confirm it for her. So it became very difficult at my dad's. And so I for the time between, like, let's say when I was 16 to 26, I go out in the world and I start forging my own relationships. And unsurprisingly, it's like a mess. I'm like, every relationship I'm entering with this idea of like, how do I help? What does this person need? And how do I give, provide for them everything they need so that I won't be left? That was my big driving fear, is I'm going to be abandoned. And how do I earn love and approval? This is like just going right into these relationships that had the same dynamic I grew up with. And this is what we tend to do, is we are attracted to situations that feel like home, because we think if we can get the happy ending in the present, it'll fix what happened in the past. It does not. It doesn't work. You always end up compounding your original pain. That is what happens, because you're drawn toward people who are providing that same dynamic, whatever it was for you. For me, that disorganized attachment, hot and cold, not being sure what you're going to get from, one day to another, 1 hour to another, highly critical people I couldn't please, people who were untrustworthy. Like, this was all what I knew, and that is what I was moving toward. Well, if that's what you're moving toward, guess what you're going to get? It's not going to be pretty. You're going to get more heartbreak. And so that's what happened. And eventually I realized, like, and I've been in therapy. I was in therapy off and on. Started when I was 13. I stayed with that therapist for 2 years. I'm writing about what happened with her in the memoir, so I'm not going to go into that right now, but it was unbelievable. So after 2 years of working with her, that ended abruptly one afternoon. And then I went back into therapy when I think I was like 17, 18, maybe 19. So, and I started going to Al-Anon when I was 17. Al-Anon is for family members of alcoholics. And so I was seeking help. Like, I knew I was not okay. I knew that I was playing things out and that I was going to keep having my heart broken, dealing with more grief, more loss, and the loss of this happy ending I was looking for, right? I was really trying to find my happy ending. And what I thought a happy ending was like a happy family living under one roof. That is what I was trying to create. Almost, I went to a fabulous school. I graduated a year early. I went to Columbia. I went to Barnard College at Columbia University. I did not know exactly what I wanted to pursue. I was kind of like vacillating between maybe psychology, writing, English major, theater. Like, I didn't know what exactly I was here to do. And so but I did know I wanted to be in a happy marriage and have some kids and at least get to experience what a happy family felt like. Like, I wanted to create that myself. So I knew those things, and I knew that what I would like already, almost immediately, I knew, well, this is not the way. And the first awful relationship that I had began when I was 17, ended when I was 20. And I talked about this also in a previous episode, and essay, and I think it was in Don't Stand So Close to Me. But I was in a relationship with a much older man, 20 years older. My parents have 19 years between them. It's not really, wasn't an original idea. And it did not go well. I really barely made it out of there with my life, and I mean that. Like, he almost did me in. He was so emotionally abusive, and I was so tender at the time, and It almost did me in. So I knew I needed to really figure things out. And for a while, and this can happen in therapy, I became really attached to this very sad narrative about my childhood. Um, and the narrative was something like, well, of course you are this way. Like, of course you are deeply afraid of being hurt. You're deeply afraid of being left. You're deeply afraid of having your trust violated. Like, of course you are, because look at what happened, like, look at what was done. Of course you don't like trust yourself because you spent your whole childhood telling people you didn't think your mom was okay and they all told you it was you and she was fine. Like, of course this is how things are for you. Well, in my early 20s, the sort of drama of that, the sadness of that, the tragic nature of all of that, is really attached to that. If you had met me in my early 20s, I would have told you this really sad story of my childhood. And that was like interesting to me for a few years. Oh, I'm broken. I'm broken, and I'm screwed up in this. I'm never going to be okay, and I'm never going to, it's because of all these things that happen. Okay. So at a certain point that became really boring, and that's usually hopefully what happens in your mid 20s. You're like, I could stay here on this hill. I could die on this hill of pointing fingers at my parents and being enraged and blaming them for every horrible thing that's happening in my life currently. Or I could realize I'm, 25, 26, my frontal lobe has come fully online, and any decisions I'm making now, like, those are mine. I own those, and if I'm making decisions that are leading to heartbreak, it's on me, it's not on them. And that, thankfully, that is what happened. In my like mid to late 20s, I'm like, yeah, I could do this. I could stay angry and I could keep pointing fingers at them. But I don't think that's really going to help me in my life, and I don't think that's going to help me with the things that I'm trying to accomplish. It's not going to help me in my relationships with them. And at this point, I was also like 6 years into my yoga practice, and I was really trying to like just drop it. Like, okay, I've processed all that. Like, I understand a lot of things about myself and why I am the way I am, but I don't want to be stuck there. And that is what I started to really explore in my yoga practice, is like, because I felt, for me personally, and I'm not saying this is for everyone, but for me in therapy, it was incredibly useful for me to be able to identify why I was the way I was, and what my tendencies were, what my triggers were, what the pitfalls were to watch out for. It was incredibly helpful, but I didn't want to be in a situation where I'm like, okay, so that's it, I'm stuck. I'm going to be a person who has like a deep fear of abandonment for my whole life, and there's nothing I can do about it. So every time I'm in a relationship with someone and they need to like go away on a business trip or something, I'm going to freak out. I don't want to do that. Or I'm going to be constantly worried that they're cheating on me. Like, I don't want to, that's no fun. Like, I don't want that for myself, like, there's got to be a way through this, or some liberation available here. And for me, that piece of it happened on my yoga mat, because I just began to realize I can process stuff here in my body. I'm left to my own devices, like, cerebral Sally. Like, I'll just like ruminate and, think I can sort of scientifically break it down and figure it out. And, and it's like, I need that somatic, practice. I need to get in my body and breathe, and I don't want to have to take things on faith. Like, certain things sound really good that you read, but I need to actually feel it to know that it's true. And that is what I realized, I can do this on my yoga mat. Like, that's actually what this practice is about, is I'm going to focus on my breath so I can calm my nervous system, and then I'm just going to pay attention from moment to moment. And I'm going to see, as I'm making these shapes with my body, what's happening in here? Like, what is the inner voice doing? As I'm breathing and moving, is it quiet, or is it, or not? And for me, it was not quiet. It was really, really critical and shaming and unrelenting. And it was like, I just realized, this being inside my own head is so painful. Like this is not it, right? And I don't want to live my life trapped in this like prison with a really shaming, emotionally abusive, roommate, whatever you want to think of it, voice in your head. You can't evict that voice, right? It's in your head. You wake up in the morning and there it is. You go to sleep at night, there it is. All day long, everything you're doing, you take a left, you should have taken a right, and the voice, you idiot, whatever, like shaming you for tiny mistakes and big mistakes. Like it's a really, really painful way to live. And so I realized that is where I needed to start working. And what happened for me is I just somehow put it together. And part of it is, I was doing teacher trainings and I was really studying and just trying to deepen my own understanding, my meditation practice, my yoga practice of how do you actually cultivate inner peace. Like, how do you do that? And I did get really kind of, I do get cerebral about these things, but I started playing with that on my mat every day. And I decided that when I'm on my yoga mat, if that voice that is so critical and shaming pipes up, I'm going to replace it with a kind voice, like as fast as I can. So as soon as it was like in my awareness, and a lot of these things are happening outside of our awareness. You don't even think, like for me in my 20s, I didn't even think about my inner voice. I just thought like, it didn't even occur to me that I could affect any change on my inner voice. Just like, this is just the voice in my head. But you can actually, you don't have to live with a really nasty inner critic. And so that's what I started doing with my practice is just, if I fall out of a pose, right? And my instant reaction is like, oh, and I would not, it wouldn't just be that my face would turn red, my whole body would turn red if I fell. If I made a mistake, I came out of my childhood thinking, you cannot make mistakes, you must be perfect all the time. And of course I had 12 years of ballet, which is all about like sort of, how things look on the outside, even if you're, no matter what is happening. And I don't want to paint all ballet dancers with that brush. I think some people can pursue that and not have it be an emotional, psychological nightmare. I just think for me, I was so type A and such a perfectionist to begin with. Being in that environment was exactly like what I did not need. And so I had to kind of really unlearn that, and if I fell out of a pose, because I was playing with like arm balances and inversions, and I was not a gymnast and I was not a kid who dove headfirst into a pool. So I had to overcome that fear, of, it's a fear of breaking your neck, right? If you have some fear of like what arm balance is, or, handstands or what headstands, it's like, you're afraid of breaking your neck. It's a good, healthy fear. And so you want to make sure that as you're playing with these things, you're doing it safely and you're ready, you've got building blocks and you're taking your time and you're working with people who know what they're doing. But I started to realize if I can overcome fear on my yoga mat, I can overcome fear in my life. And so a fear of like falling on your face in, Bakasana is, if you can just work with your fear, right? Like put a bolster down in front of your face and keep playing with it. And if you fall, you're going to fall on something soft. Like if you can get through your fear and work with it on your mat, you can do it in your life. And so it translates. It's like, if I'm afraid of that, then, and I can work through that and start to realize, like, I remember the first time I did Bakasana, crow pose, I remember the feeling of being like, the just incredible like confidence boost it was, because I when I first started going, I had tons of flexibility from all the years of ballet and not the upper body strength. I did not know how people were doing chaturanga. I was like, what is happening in this room? People are levitating is what it looked like to me. And I had all that tension in my shoulders and across my chest and all of that. And so, and fear of like falling and making mistakes. And if you're afraid of falling and making mistakes, it's really hard to approach arm balances and inversions. So it's a lot of really good stuff that you can work on, and work through. And that is what happened. And so when I was able to start working with my fear instead of letting it shut me down, deciding if I can't do something perfectly right away, I'm not going to do it at all. I started to realize, well, I can apply this like off of my mat, and I don't have to get everything right. And if I'm going to be in a relationship with someone, yeah, you're going to be vulnerable. Like, there's always a possibility it's not going to work out and you're going to have your heart broken. Like, that's a reality. Or things happen, we lose people. It's a reality of being human, that if you open your heart, there's a very decent chance you're going to experience pain at some point. We don't last forever and ever. So even if you are with someone and it's beautiful and amazing, neither one of you is going to last forever and ever. At a certain point, someone's going, and that's brutal. And so you got to kind of know that and accept it and do it anyway, right? Like, feel the fear and do it anyway, because I feel like you got one life, right? You got one life to live that we know of. Like, I'm not going to let fear stop me from experiencing love and joy and deep friendships and, pursuing my creative endeavors. Like, I'm not going to let fear stop me. I don't want to live like that. And so, the other part of this is I got to a place where I'm like, this narrative and this sad story about my childhood is really not serving me. And yes, these things happened. Yes, I have legitimate, heartache about it, and I'm going to let myself mourn the childhood I did not get to have. But I don't want to spend the rest of my life holding on to the rage toward my parents. It's like, it's exhausting, and it's not productive. I'd rather use that energy for things that feel good, that are productive, that are freeing. And what becomes tricky for a lot of people is if you're dealing with people who have not evolved. And unfortunately with my mom, the drinking continued and continued and continued, and it really did not stop until she got sick with ALS and she couldn't swallow anymore. And yeah, so it went on for her whole life up until the end, up until the last several months of her life, when she couldn't swallow anymore. And so I knew that, like, I didn't want to. I loved her. I loved her. Like, this is sometimes, I think even some of my close friends sometimes miss this part, or have missed it. I don't think they miss it anymore, but I think that it's surprising for some people who've known me for a long time to understand, like, I had to spend so much time on boundaries with her. And I had so many conversations over the years with the closest people in my life about, ways that I did feel deeply. I was just deeply sad that she wouldn't deal with this. She would not face the reality of her alcoholism and do something about it. And because of that, it really limited our ability to be close. I wanted to be able to confide in her and talk to her and call her and tell her, I wanted that so desperately. But the other piece of this is she had rage. It wasn't just her drinking. It was that when she drank, she would come after me. And it was like, she would come after me, like, full on, it was devastating. Like, when I was growing up, it really looked to me like she hated me, when she would be drinking and she would come after me. Not only was I terrified and, feeling like I could be overpowered, I was also, her whole face would get twisted, and, I just could not understand why she was so enraged with me, or what it was, because it wasn't being directed at other people, it was being directed at me. And I couldn't figure out, like, what is wrong with me? Like, why am I not lovable to my own mom? And I like, it's still, even now talking about it, it's emotional. Like, I feel sad for my, my, like, child self, that, like, that was something I grew up thinking and believing, and it really, of course, impacted my self-esteem. And that was a story that I really had to unravel. And as a grown woman, I can look back and I really think that what happened for my mom is she was really in love with my dad. She really was. And I think that, she lost her own dad when she was 13. So it's probably not a coincidence that she fell in love with somebody 20 years older, 19 years older. It's probably not. There's probably something in it there. And they were, according to her, and she told me this many times as I was growing up, blissfully happy for the first 4 years. And then she got pregnant with me, and my dad started cheating on her when she was 7 months pregnant with me. And she found out when I was 3 months old. And I just think he broke her heart in such a profound way. And I think she blamed me. Because things had been really great between them up until I, was about to make my appearance in the world. And I think it was subconscious. But I think when she drank, that is what came out, was this rage of like, it was my fault that she was left and that her heart was so badly broken and that he did what he did. And I wonder also if it was like losing her dad again, and like that was sort of my fault in her subconscious. So that is what was happening as I was growing up. And I'll never get to know for sure if I'm right, but like some things came to light at the very end of her life, and it kind of confirmed that theory for me in a pretty meaningful way. And so, that is what it looks like when you have some deep stuff swimming underneath the surface that you're not dealing with. It's going to come out in these other ways. And it's going to come out like sideways. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not, and it's really painful. It's painful for you, and it's painful for the people that you love the most in the world. And so you're always better off. And I know sometimes people are so scared. They think, well, if I let all these big feelings come to the surface, they're going to do me in. It's the not letting them to the surface that does you in. It's the not dealing with them. That's the stuff that does you in, that makes you need to reach for a drink and another one and another one and another one, or whatever it's the not being able to tolerate this really deep feeling of unrest and of not being like okay. And I think that's what was going on for her. And it's one of the big heartbreaks of my life. I'm incredibly grateful that we got to a beautiful place in the last few weeks of her life when she was on her deathbed. I finally, like, I could see it happen, that she got the download of like, oh, my daughter like really loves me. Like, she is showing up, in every conceivable way here. And she could see that I was devastated about what was happening to her. Like, she could see it. And I think she finally realized the problems between us were about my drinking. Like that's what was between us. It wasn't, because her interpretation of my boundaries, she wanted me to pretend that everything was cool, and that we were good. Like, she would get upset. Why can't we be closer? And I'm like, well, because when you drink, you're awful to me. And when you drink things that I've shared with you in confidence, you use them. You don't hold back. You go for the jugular. So I can't trust you. I can't confide in you. I can't lean on you to be consistently in my corner. So how can we be close? I want to be, but I can't like deny reality here. But she wanted me to deny reality, and she wanted me to behave like she was my best friend, and she was always and so it was very upsetting for her. I was really the only person in her life who would not do that, who would not just act like everything was okay. I just couldn't do it, because it was not okay for my mental health and my well-being. In order for me to heal and be okay, and not just okay, but to be happy, and thriving in my own life, I had to acknowledge reality as it is and as it was. I needed that in order to not lose my mind and be able to trust myself and be able to trust my gut and trust my perception and trust that my, feelings about it. If I saw something, I could believe it was true, Um, and so my whole adult life with her became about boundaries. And I moved 3,000 miles away in order to be able to be close to her in a crazy way. It's like I need to be out of the geographical, I can't be so close to her because I'm caught up in this. I'm caught up in the alcoholism, even though I'm out of the house and I'm trying to start my life here. I'm too easily swept back into the current of her alcoholism, and if we're both in New York City, like I'm going to be seeing her and she's going to be drinking and it's going to be painful. And this cycle is just like, how do you recover if you're continually exposed to the thing that's like hurting you? Right. And so I moved, and then I would see her 2 or 3 times a year. Like I would go back east with the kids at least once, sometimes twice, and she would come out to LA, sometimes alone, sometimes with my stepdad, at least once or twice. So we would see each other every few months, and I spoke to her on the phone a lot. But I would always call her during the day because I knew then she wouldn't start drinking. She would be sober. And yet, even when she was sober and we'd be having a great conversation, I could not open up to her about my life because I knew at some point she would be drinking and anything I shared would be, not protected. And so it was hard, and I went through a lot of pain. Like I obviously went through my own divorce. My kids were tiny. My son was 4, my daughter was 1.5. There were times I really desperately wanted to be able to lean on her in those ways, just woman to woman, and I couldn't. And I could never leave my kids with her. Like she would always say to me every summer, why don't you bring the kids to the lake, and just leave them for a week and go rest. I know you're exhausted. And I'm like, internally enraged because it's like, I'd love to do that. I could use the rest. I am exhausted. I'm not going to leave my children, in a situation where you're going to be drinking at night and then they're exposed to what I grew up with and at a lake, part B, like, no, like it's not going to happen. So it's really hard. And a lot of the time I wouldn't say that to her because I didn't want to, I knew it wasn't going to go well. I knew that she wasn't going to own it and say, I understand why you don't want to leave them with me, because of my drinking. Like that was not going to happen. And so it was difficult, I was as close to her as I possibly could be given the parameters. And the parameters were, up to her. Like at any time, if she had decided, I do have a drinking problem, there was only one time in my life, I was about 32, and she said, I'm a high functioning alcoholic. Like I know that. And I was like, wait, it was like the earth stopped spinning for a second. I'm like, wait, what? And whatever that moment was, it came and went. Like I never heard that from her again. It was just it was like I heard it one time with my own, ears, and then she totally walked that back. This is a bummer, to say the least. And why am I talking about all this? Okay, well, when she became really ill, it was during the pandemic, and we had a problem. She came to my wedding in 2019, and again, I'm not going to get into it too much right now, but it was painful for me. Like she drank a lot, and it just wasn't, she could not be happy for me. She just couldn't, like participate in the joy that I was feeling, that my husband was feeling, that my kids were feeling. She just had a look on her face the whole weekend like she was sucking on a lemon, and she was drunk a lot. She was late to things. Like it was a real bummer. It wasn't a shock. It's not like, and that's what I was getting at, and that's where I'm going. My expectation, I knew that was always a possibility. Of course you hope, it's going to be a good showing. But I knew at this point in my life, like it wasn't a surprise anymore. And so I didn't even, it did not, I didn't allow it to diminish my own joy. And in fact, it was my like best friends who were like, "Are you okay? Like your mom, like, even we were having pictures taken at the venue before the what am I trying to say? Before the wedding. And I was dressed, and like she arrived at the venue separately. I had gotten her a car, and even like the morning of my wedding, as I was getting ready, she was calling and saying she needed the car later. And I said, "Mom, if I get the car later, you're going to be late for the wedding. Like you won't make it. And also I'm getting ready. I can't stop and call the car company right now." So it was that. And then like when I walked in, she like couldn't even sort of say, "Oh honey, you look beautiful," like even if she didn't mean it. She couldn't even sort of fake it for me. She hated, I had really short hair, she hated it. She told me she hated it. Like it was, she just couldn't like rise above and just like celebrate with me. But I didn't even, I was just like, my expectations were, it wasn't a shock. It was my friends who were like, you know, because I was saying to her as we were getting pictures taken, "You look beautiful, Mom. Like, dress looks great, your hair looks great, you look beautiful." And it was later that one of my best friends was like, "Do you realize, like, you're getting your pictures taken and you're telling your mom how beautiful she looks, and it's your wedding day?" Like, and it was almost like, I mean, thank you for noticing that, I guess, and sharing it, but it's probably better for me not to dwell on that. Um, anyway, I it becomes more complicated when the people that you are, that have hurt you badly, deeply, are still behaving in those ways that are painful. Then it becomes more complicated. And your only hope is boundaries, right? To keep yourself safe and to have this person in your life, which I wanted to have her in my life. That was, never really an issue for me. Like I didn't want to not have her in my life. I just wanted to figure out how to do it in a way that wouldn't break my heart on a regular basis. And with my dad, it was really very different. Like he moved away. He got married for the fourth time when I was 20, and he moved to North Carolina. And it was sort of funny, I guess. Like he ended up marrying his high school sweetheart, who is someone I heard about as I was a kid. He would tell stories about her my whole life, and so he reconnected with her at a reunion, and boom, they got married. And even then, I was like 20, and he called me, and he was like telling me, we reconnected, and she came to New York, and it was just like, we made love all weekend like teenagers. I'm like, ew, like, Dad, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to know that. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to have that mental image in my head. I don't want to know about anything to do with your sex life. Like, ew, like, stop. Like, please. And he just didn't have boundaries. Like, he didn't have that boundary that, is just kind of like a pretty common sense thing when you're talking to your kids. Just don't, right? So yeah. So with him, he was just like in North Carolina living his life, and he would come to New York to visit like once a year. And then when I moved to Los Angeles, he would come. I went there when he got married. I went to his wedding. And I went another time when I was like, I want to say I was 24, 25, 26, something like that. But mostly he would come. And then when I moved to Los Angeles and I had kids, like he would come out for the weekend. He would stay at a motel nearby, and he would, basically just be here for a weekend, and then he would fly back to North Carolina. And even that was tough. Like, he's not a patient man. He never has been. And I had to talk to him about not raising his voice to my kids. He was a rough, he didn't get the memo. He didn't get the memo. So my mom gets really sick, in an extraordinary like turn of events. She blames me for her ALS, which was devastating in ways that I will not get into right now. And made it all, a lot harder. And there was a year where we're in the pandemic. I can't fly to New York. Um, no one's flying, And I've got the kids Zooming from home, and my mother is, at first denying the diagnosis. So that went on for months. She was not, and they didn't diagnose it right away. These motor neuron degenerative diseases are hard to diagnose because they present differently for different people. And so it took some time to get the diagnosis, but she was convinced that it was me, for quite a while, which was really painful. And even after the diagnosis, she was convinced that, it was me, that I was, yeah. So it was brutal, and I found myself in a situation where I was showing up for her, of course, no matter what, anyway. Even in the face of like being blamed for this horrific thing that was happening to her, there just was still no. Of course, I was going to be on the Zoom calls with the doctors and researching, trying to figure out what we could do to like help, and also trying to talk to her about accepting this diagnosis, because there are drugs to slow it down, but if you won't take them because you don't think it's what you have. So there was a lot there, and denial is a tough thing. And when you're an alcoholic, you've got, she had a really strong denial muscle. So it took months for her to accept the diagnosis. And it was really, really painful, and I couldn't go. I couldn't get on a plane and go see her. I almost did. There was a point in time where I almost went, and then realized like the quarantine restrictions in New York City changed like right after I had booked my flights, and so it would have made the trip like 2.5 weeks long with hotel stays, and so I had to cancel that one. And we went in August, of 2019. No, is that right? It was 2020. Yeah, of course, it was 2020. It was during the pandemic. So we went in August, and am I wrong again? It was 2021. I'm so sorry. It was 2021. Yeah, it was August of 2021. She passed away in December of 2021. So we went in August, and wow, I really had to stop and like get my calendar straight there. So we went in August, and it was absolutely, I won't talk about it for too long, but it was just gutting. It really was. It was just unbelievable to see what had happened. And ALS is honestly, it's one of the most dreadful, painful diseases. I mean, it's merciless. It takes everything from you, and I mean, there's so many things that we don't think about, that we just take for granted, like being able to swallow, being able to formulate words in your mind and open your mouth and speak them. Um, being able to chew and eat and drink, and like, I mean, just stand up and walk from point A to point B. Like, there's so many things that we really just don't think about because, because we're used to having those things. We wake up and we get out of bed and we go to the bathroom. It's like, and when you see someone just, I mean, she's just robbed of everything, slowly, painfully, mercilessly, and it was, I don't think I'll never get over that. It was really, really, deeply painful, and then she took a real turn for the worse in November, and that's where I spent the month of November mostly in the ICU in New York City, and that is where we finally, I think she realized, because I was with her 12 hours a day and I was advocating for her, and talking to the doctors and talking to the social worker and just doing everything. And I would fly home for literally felt like a minute, just like look at my kids and look at my husband and get back on a plane and go back to New York. So I think she just realized, like, she couldn't convince herself anymore. Like, she's like, well, clearly my daughter, like, loves me, like she's just doing anything and everything possible here. So I think it just finally, she couldn't like deny reality anymore. And I don't think she wanted to either. I don't think she wanted to die without us like getting there, and we did. I'm like really grateful to say we did. And with my dad, I'm going to speed this up a little bit. So she passed away in December of 2021. And then at the same as all that was happening, my dad, his fourth wife, had Alzheimer's, and she was really declining rapidly. And my half sister and I got a call that he needed to be picked up from Pennsylvania, and she was like, I'm going. I'm retired. I don't have kids. I'm gonna go and get him. I'm gonna drive and get him. And she did. She went and got him, and she took care of everything, which was, I mean, a huge, I don't know what I would have done without her at that time, because I was deep in my mother's illness. My mother had not passed yet when this happened. And so it was just a brutal, like, really painful chapter of a lot of pain and stress and grief. And so she took him to Georgia, and that is where he was. And then my mom passed away. And then in just an unbelievable turn of events, my mom died in December of 2021, and then Carrie passed away that spring of 2022, very suddenly, very unexpectedly. And the stress of having my dad, I think, was unfortunately a big part of it. And I think for Carrie, she really showed up for him. I mean, she really showed up for him. And this is a man who left the family when she was 16. Her brother was 14, devastated her mother, like moved to New York City with a girl who was just a little older than Carrie at the time, and married her, and really didn't like visit his kids. I don't think he was sending child support. Like, he kind of just abandoned his family and married my mom. And she just showed up for him. Like, she really did. She moved him into her house. He lived with her and her husband for 9 months while we were, I was doing everything I could do to help from California get his like benefits sorted and all of that. But she ended up having to do the heavy lifting all the way, because she was there with him. And that went on, and then she passed away, and I was not okay. I was not okay at the time. It took me about a year just to be okay after my mom. Just to get my head above water, like on a regular basis. I was really knocked like completely sideways and underwater for like the first year. Yeah. And life has to go on as all these things are happening. That's what I was talking about in the essay. It's like, the world doesn't stop because you're going through like intense grief. Lunches need to get packed, and kids have homework and pressures and places they need to be driven and things that need to happen, and the dog needs to be walked, and it's like life goes on, and you've got to show up the best that you can when you're sort of like a mom. And so it was just it was a rough year. And then I realized, well, I'm not moving my dad out here, because there's no way for me to manage his care from another state. And so I did. I moved him out here, and the very short version is it was tough. And so he's difficult. He was, he would sort of wildly vacillate between being really grateful for all the things that I was doing and then being really awful. He'd yell at me and I mean, it was like an up and down thing. And I set really clear boundaries with him from the beginning and just said, if you raise your voice at me, I'm not visiting you. Like, you may not do that. I might not get everything right, or I might not be doing everything exactly the way you want, but you need to speak to me nicely, or I won't be visiting that week. And you can try again the next week. And he got it, but I had to do it a lot. It was not, it was not a lesson he learned the first time or the second time. It was a kind of a thing where, there were weeks where I didn't go because he wasn't nice, you know. Um, but here's the thing. I I found a really great place for him that was half an hour away. I took him to all of his doctor's appointments. I got all of his fiduciary stuff set up. Most weeks I did go out there. I would take him to a doctor's appointment. I would take him to lunch. I would take him to Walgreens. I would take him to Dunkin' Donuts. I would sit with him in the courtyard. I would bring the kids, my husband. We'd go and visit. We'd have like a brunch with him on the weekends or whatever. I showed up for him, and I did have to grapple with what I was doing in the same way I wondered why Carrie was showing up for him so much, because before I moved him out here myself, I did wonder. I'm like, wow, she is really like showing up for him, and he is not behaving properly. Like, she would call me and she would just be like beside, like he kicked her dog, like he just was not easy. He wasn't easy. He wasn't patient. And then I was in that position, right? And I just realized that it doesn't even matter what kind of dad he was or is. It doesn't even matter. Like, it really matters, like, how do I feel a person should be treated at the end of their life? And there wasn't going to be anybody else to make it good for him. I was it. There was no one else. His son doesn't speak to him and hasn't for decades, understandably, and so it was me or nobody. And I'm like, well, no matter how bad things have been and how much maybe, and he was a good friend to people, and he was a good uncle to people, and he was a very talented artist, and he got involved with like the Stephen Ministry and would go and talk to people who had terminal illnesses and just be there with the family and try to support. So he had good qualities too. It was not all bad. He just wasn't a good dad. And so if I wasn't gonna like show up for him, then he would have like died alone in an apartment. It would have been horrible. And there just wasn't any way I wasn't gonna let that happen, and it wouldn't have felt okay for me as a human being. And so I moved him and I took care of him, and I was kind to him, and I made sure he had everything he needed, and I spent time with him, and I did the best I could for him to make things good. And I had to sort of laugh at this, the kind of like the karmic, like, wow, like I started my life taking care of this man, and now at the end of his life, I'm taking care of him. Like, it's me. Like, I'm the one left holding this bag. No one else is gonna take it. But it has more to do with me as a person. And I think that is for all of us to just kind of think about it for, any amount of time that you can or are willing to or interested in. Is we always like have a choice of how we're going to respond to things. Now, if someone is actively hurting you, like violating your boundaries, being disrespectful, is currently just unwell and is not going to be good, then you got to protect yourself, right? You cannot put yourself in the line of fire for people who are going to damage your heart and your well-being. To me, that's just a hard, non-negotiable. Like, you can't do that to yourself. But if you are at a place with someone where you know who they are, you've already processed, you've already done the work, you've already integrated, you've already had the therapy and done the yoga, like you know what to expect, you know who this person is, and you know how it's going to be, and you're not going to take it personally. If you can be in that mindset, then to me it's like, okay, how do I want to be in the face of this? Like, what choice am I going to make about how I'm going to show up? And I am very at peace with how I showed up for my dad. I know that he died feeling loved and cared for and safe. And I'm glad of that. Like, I wanted that for him. And it feels a lot better. It's so easy to want to paint people with like one brush or another to make somebody all bad or a saint, and it's like you're really most of the time like not getting it right, because even the most difficult people, or there's going to be some good qualities in there, and even the most beautiful amazing people, there's going to be some stuff like you really get yourself into some trouble if you're insistent on making things black or white, good or bad, um, right or wrong. It's like most situations, both on the micro level, right, individual level, and macro, are complex, and you're gonna have things that you can look at that are like, if you're willing to just kind of look objectively, and try to embrace the the quality in just human beings, which is like, we're not perfect. We're not going to get everything right. It's not going to be all good or all bad. Like, you're just gonna have a much easier time in your own world, like in your own personal life, and in like just moving through the world at large. If you can look at things and not instantly react, not instantly decide, I'm going to put a label on this right now. I've learned about this thing. I've known about it for 5 minutes, and I've made my decision. Boom. It's like you just try to like breathe and calm your nervous system, and recognize that the best thing in all situations is going to be like love. Like, how can I show up in the most loving way possible? How can I open my ears and open my hands and open my heart and open my mind and really try to understand when someone is in pain or when someone is behaving in a way that feels incomprehensible? Like, what is happening? To try to forgive people where you can. You are going to feel a lot better, and it's better for everyone around you. It's a win-win if you can just try to move toward becoming more responsive and less reactive. And that's an Osho quote, and Osho was not a terrific guy. He's a spiritual teacher who ended up hurting a lot of people, and robbing a lot of people blind. So hello, like, there's a perfect example, right, of someone who everyone's calling a guru for a long time, and he turns out to be super unethical. But he had a good quote, and he wrote a couple of good books, or somebody did, in his name, and one of those is, you're trying to become less reactive and more responsive in situations. And that's a true thing. And so for me, I'm going to glean the gold, wherever it may be. If there's like a teacher that I think, is someone inspiring, I'm still knowing this is a human being. Okay. And the minute you start thinking otherwise, you're in trouble. And we just all need to be like human together, and a little, if possible, more forgiving. Like, let go of the things, the narratives that are not helping you, and open to something that it gives you freedom, to write a new story. And I really hope that this has been, helpful and given you some food for thought. And I'm always around to have these conversations, always respond to comments, and I'm not hard to find. And thank you so much for joining me for this talk.